Here's my audience. As said by Alec Pantaleo, man, I love wrestling. We're just a bunch of sadistic psychopaths trying to achieve things society deems worthless, but we consider priceless. Many people see wrestling as two men in tight clothing rolling around on a mat. But when someone really looks and sees the trueness of the sport, they see that it instills perseverance, faith, and respect. I believe that wrestling is an amazing sport because it gives these three qualities to anybody involved in it, whether it's the athlete or the spectators. And I've been around wrestling my whole life, and I've been around a lot of other sports too, but I believe wrestling is definitely my favorite, and it should be an Olympic sport. But to fully understand wrestling and my take on this issue, I think we need to go back to the beginning and the history of wrestling. Wrestling began 5,000 years ago with the Sumerian culture. Ancient Egyptians, like these pictured here, were also found in the Beni Hassan tomb, and there's 400 different matches of people in the one tomb. In Greece, wrestling was thought to shape adolescents into men and be a good activity for them to train for battle. Professional wrestling became popular in France in the 1830s. People would form groups and then they would go and wrestle in circus-like settings with like tightrope walkers and bearded women, and people would just come and watch the wrestlers and all that. And it started to become known as Greco-Roman and spread across Europe. Wrestling was in the first Olympic Games in 708 BC. The first Olympic Games was a pentathlon, so they had 5 different events. The people would participate in the 4 events, and then they would wrestle as the last event. So the best 2 would wrestle, and the wrestling matches could last up to like 2 or 3 days or a couple of hours. It just depended. And whoever won the wrestling match was the winner of the Olympics that year. The Dark Ages then came along, and no sports really took place except for wrestling. The social elite had wrestling, and that was supported by the writers and painters of that time. So it was really an activity of like more of an art and a science. And wrestling stood the test of time, and even though not a lot of sports were going on, it still went on, and it made the first Olympics. So it was part of the first 10 sports in the first Olympics. And Jordan Burroughs states, "Here we are, amazing athletes, doing our best to make the Olympic teams and support our families, and we're going to have this opportunity completely stripped away from us." This was in response to when the International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, decided to cut the Olympics. And it just shows him saying that for all of time we've had wrestling, and they're just going to take it away. And a lot of people were upset with that. And so I wanted to find out why wrestling was removed from the Olympics. And it was removed because FILA, or the United World of Wrestling, did not want to change the rules that the IOC thought was making the sport difficult to understand or watch. And FILA did not believe that wrestling would be removed from the Olympics, so they didn't really fight that hard because they just figured it was going to be in the Olympics forever, because that's how it has been. And also the pentathlon was being added to the Olympics, and so they needed to remove a sport. And according to John Irving, 180 countries have wrestling teams, and only 53 have a pentathlon team. So it makes more sense to have wrestling because the Olympics is for the entire world and as many countries as possible to be involved. So I feel like wrestling, since it had 180 countries, would better be supported by the world than the 53 countries who have the pentathlon. So wrestling should definitely be an Olympic sport. The FILA eventually did change the rules that were hard to understand. These were the ball draw and clinch rules, and a lot of people liked that. Kyle Snyder claims that he loves the rule changes. He thinks that they are better suited for the audience and have more fun while they're watching. So a lot more viewers would look at the Olympics and watch the Olympics and wrestling because the rules made it an easier sport to watch. Women's wrestling was also added. They took away some weight classes from the men's wrestling so then they could have a women's division, and that made it to where it was more equal for both sexes, which makes it more adequate for the Olympics because then everybody can be in it and involved. Cutting wrestling would not only affect the Olympic athletes, but also the 27,000 high school wrestlers, 8,000 of those being girls, according to John Irving, and also the college teams, because the sport wouldn't be as popular because they wouldn't have this chance to compete against the entire world. Wrestling is a sport for anybody. As Dizdek says, we're the most equalitarian of all sports, or as close to a mediocrity as you're going to get. There's no refined field, there's no gloves, no clubs, no balls. It's two equal-sized wrestlers on a mat, armed with nothing but their technical skills and their will to win, and we determine who the best is. This quote really spoke to me because he's saying how anybody, even the poorest countries or the wealthiest countries, can have a wrestling team, and that just is the point of the Olympics. The Olympics are so all the countries can play on an equal field and look at their athletes. So that is important, that wrestling, all you need is some wrestling shoes and just to teach yourself how to wrestle. You don't need any special equipment. So I believe wrestling is a unique sport in that and should be kept in the Olympics. The history, wrestling has been around forever and helped develop the modern day Olympics, so therefore it should stay in the Olympics. It was in the modern day Olympics, and when it was taken away, a lot of people didn't like that, and that shows that there is room for wrestling in the Olympics, and it will be supported, and it should be kept because it is for everybody. Any country can do it, and it is just a great sport and should be in the Olympics. Society may see two sweaty men trying to manhandle each other on a mat when they look at wrestling, but they do not see the ancient scriptures and depictions of the sport as an art. They do not see the typical lives and conditions of the wrestlers who train to gain skill and gain knowledge about how to eat right in order to fuel their body and be able to compete. They do not see the sweat of the numerous high school and college athletes that learn new moves and life lessons at practice every day. They do not understand the tears of a grown man when he is unlacing his wrestling shoes at the center of a mat, signaling his last match of his career. Some will never understand the perseverance, respect, and faith of this sport, but the values are real, and that is the reason I love wrestling and believe it should be an Olympic sport. Thank you. What? Oh, yeah. I'm doing a terrible job of this.